Now I welcome you to the second phase of our discussion on equality. We have already seen that it is a very confusing concept, but at the same time it has some real message that without equality, in fact, the very concept of democracy is not full and perfect. So we must now inquire into the deeper aspects of the debate on equality. You know that in the history of political thinking, there are distinctly three traditions of equality conception. First, liberal tradition. Second, the conservative tradition. And the third, socialist tradition. In the liberal tradition, the focus is entirely on the individual. That is the special characteristics of liberalism as a political ideology. It is the individual whose ideas, wants, aspirations were championed by the early liberals and by the later liberals as a whole. And the reason, the basic philosophical reason of the liberals of arguing like this, that individual is the real focus, or should be the real focus, is the assumption of universality of human reason. The entire liberal argument depends on these assumptions, that there is something called human reason, and the human reason is the same in all ages, universality. So they try to generalize and they say that we need equality, and equality of their own brand. But they constitute this kind of tradition of thinking, suppose right from Locke to the 20th century. The second tradition is called the conservative tradition. One can start from the Greek philosopher Plato, some 2 or 3 centuries before Christ, in ancient Greece. Now, as a philosopher, Plato started analyzing the basic elements of human nature, and he identified at least 2 elements, which what he called envy and appetite, 2 instinct, universal instinct of man. And what is the reason behind demand that equality is necessary? Plato and the conservative tradition's answer is this, that equality is demanded because of inherent instinct of envy of one towards others. You think about it. I want to be equal. Why? Because you envy. So that's what the conservative reasoning, that envy and then appetite. That what others are having, why should I not have also? So that is the way of thinking of Plato, and that tradition went, of course, with some gaps for some period of time. In fact, if we want to find out the core point in this conservative argument, that is, the demand for equality is equated with depravity in human nature.
So equality here is not a noble concept. It's sort of tied up with...
No. Concept is noble, but how and why it emerges? If all human beings were, as Rousseau said, that they are all gods,
That's not true.
Then you can think that it's a very noble concept. But Plato and these conservative schools' argument is this, that human nature is basically depraved. And because of the depravity, envy and appetite, that the demand is vocal. We want equality.
Somewhat resonating Hobbes' view.
Yes. And third tradition is socialist, is in a sense all are equal and equality is the core point. We must achieve equality. These are the basic ideas thrown by the socialist. Now what is the origin? Origin in a sense is the golden assumptions of golden age. There was the golden age when all felt equally, brotherly, fraternally towards others. There is no envy, no competition, no jealousy. So that is the vision, just a vision, not the reality, but it is the vision of a really happy golden age. And therefore from it comes that equality we must have, because it was in the happy golden age. So that happiness we must have, and therefore we want equality in a very, very basic philosophical point of view. And the initial, when the socialism became some sort of a concrete way of thinking since the mid-19th century, suppose, there was basically two streams. One is the older, and that is the what Engels called utopian socialist. They emerged first in the picture, and then came Marxist socialism. I am not going into the debate who is scientific, who is unscientific, not that. Now utopian socialists also argued that it is the concern for leisure. We want equality, equality of labor, equality of reward. Why? Because leisure available to everybody should be equal. And leisure is a means of being happy, happiness, attaining happiness. You know, just I point out one fact, you know, in the 19th century English novels, Charles Dickens is the best person who pictured the ugly conditions of unequal English society in so many of his novels. And there, at least student of history should know that there was a time, even in the mid-19th century, when males and females had to work 16 hours a day in order to earn a living. So naturally there is a demand which appeared socialist that leisure must be increased, and that can be possible only when the income is equally enjoyed or distributed. So that is the beginning of socialist thinking. I should say beginning, I am not talking of the perfect things, etc. That is the beginning, that there should be equality in society and social relations among men, and the wherewithal with which people want to live a happy life. After all, it is a basic fact, if you think deeply, that all of us ultimately want to be happy. But the method of reaching that happiness is different in different cases, depending on a number of factors, including the larger culture of the society. So that is the derivative problem. So, socialist tradition, their first claim was that everybody has equal right to be happy. And therefore we want an egalitarian distribution of resources of the society. You see how the point comes in, emerges. And it was only after Marxian economics or Marxian thinking came in a very, very scientific manner. Marx's research not only was vast about English capitalism, his special field was British analysis of British capitalism. So it was not only vast, it was really deep and really epoch-making, I should say. You may agree or you may not agree with his materialist philosophy as such, but his economic analysis is very, particularly the concept of surplus value, which is the starting point of inequality. So these are marvelous revelations and contributions of Marx. So later on, the socialist tradition, we find the demand for equality was depending on material goods and services in equal proportions, as far as possible, of course. I hope you get the distinctions between the basic liberal approach, conservative approach, and the socialist approach.
Sir,
everybody says yes.
Sir, was Marx first one to propound the concept of economic equality?
No. I think, I'm sorry that maybe I couldn't explain it properly. I said from ancient times, through the medieval period, through the Renaissance, etc., I wanted to identify the basic stimulus in thinking about equality. Okay. Anyway, I thank you for raising the question to dispel misconception. Marx was never the first socialist also. Okay. But what I said, that Marx really can be entitled to a description of his genius, that he explained deprivation under capitalism in a very scientific manner. And his main economic contribution, really revolutionary contribution in idea, is the surplus value.
Yes, sir.
And he showed us how surplus value emerged. That is Marx was first.
Sir, the theory of surplus value is always related to labor.
Anyway, we are all laboring persons in different fields. Labor not only in factories.
In
everywhere. Even the women are laboring in the family. So labor is a common element constituting life process.
Thank you, sir.
Now, since the Protestant Reformation, distinct categories of equality came to be discussed. Like distinct categories or notions of equality. By this I mean political equality, social equality, economic equality. And now we will try to explain these three distinct forms, which have really been studied from different angles since then. Let us come to political equality first. Now, what does political equality mean? We find that Jeremy Bentham, the father of utilitarianism, he was the first philosopher to underline the necessity of political equality in a democratic society by underlining the formula of one man, one vote, which still we are following. That every individual, highly intelligent and most idiotic, the rich and the poor, the systematic mind and the erratic mind, but every person will have one vote. Then to Bentham, it was just a matter of political calculus. And he wanted to formulate his utilitarian theory of democracy by underlining this formula, one man, one vote. But it is interesting to note that his initial disciple, who later, after the death of the preceptor, he didn't agree with the teacher. I'm talking John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill was a utilitarian. To some extent he was a Benthamite. But in his mature days, he did not agree. In fact, he rejected this formula of one man, one vote, because he said that it is not found actually that all political opinions are of equal value. And that is why John Stuart Mill is often described, and I think correctly, that he was an aristocratic democrat who was a Democrat but of an aristocratic temper. He did not allow himself to be carried away by the passions and slogans for all we are equal and one man, one vote. He said the vote exercised by a philosopher certainly not equal to the mind working in the lower classes or people with depraved mind or selfish group of people or dishonest people. So how can you say that opinion of all persons are equal, on which basically the political equality ideology, politically we are equal. John Stuart Mill never shared it. And in fact, in his representative government, this book, celebrated book, he pleaded for plural voting. If a person is more intelligent, more wise, etc., he should have more votes than ordinary persons, than idiotic persons, than laboring, etc., etc. So anyway, John Stuart Mill was not accepted by history, but we must note the distinguished exception. So we come now to theoretical formulations. We find that political equality is not as simple as it appears. All persons have equal political ability to influence others. I think many persons have already accepted this, that what is the political power? To influence and to empower decision making. That is after all political power. So this political power is present in disproportion among the people. It is not uniformly distributed. So that is the basic philosophical trouble with the ideology of political equality, universal suffrage, etc. that we say. Mere theoretical acceptance of democracy. This is a very common experience of people in our generation. Any social scientist will or historian will say that all countries in the post-Second World War period which have got independence, they call we are democrat. We are democracy. Without sufficient preparation, social, cultural, economic, etc., educational, they killed we are democratic. But mere formal establishment of democracy is no guarantee that equality will be achieved among them. In fact, you will see that India's constitution in the preamble has promised a very high, or I should say the highest ideology of fraternity, equality, liberty, etc., etc. And what is the reality? So that is the point. Second, we come to the concept of social equality. And this is a very, again, a tricky concept. Social equality basically should mean abolition of differences in terms of caste, class, ethnicity, status, social status, etc. So that has to be abolished. That is the claim of social equality. For example, Ambedkar is a champion of social equality. He said that all these distinctions which is man-made must be abolished. So this is one. Again, we go to the Greek ancient position, we will find that their concept of justice is both Plato and Aristotle, that give everyone his due, not in equal proportion. He said what is due must be given to him, that is social equality. And look at the experience of post-apartheid South Africa. Now formally skin discrimination, color discrimination has been abolished. But everybody knows that South Africa certainly, society of South Africa is certainly not ideally equal or egalitarian. Same with many developing countries, third world countries, including India, we must remember also. So, and there is finally the feminist point of view, theoretically, they have got a charge against the inter-liberal tradition that their argument is, those who are feminist cause, a champion of feminist cause, that gender is such a thing which is the divider, and by sheer reference to gender, the women are suffering. So this is a substantive point of social equality or inequality, etc. Now we come to economic equality. Now this is a concept which really came, I have just explained, mainly in the context of since mid-19th century, when the first assumption that was made that poverty is not the fault of the individual. When a person is poor, not because that he has got some deficiency. It is the society which must take the responsibility and explain the origin and development and existence of poverty. So this assumption is the starting point of the demand for economic equality. And so we find even Soviet Union, immediately after the revolution, initially for a few months, that out of the revolutionary enthusiasm tried to enforce mechanical economic equality or equal pay for all. But within few months, Lenin said, stop it, it is going to be a disaster, because that will destroy our society or any human society if, irrespective of contributions of labor, etc., and many other factors, all are giving the same payment. So economic equality is needed, but it is needed to the degree that human personality development requires some economic equality in similar social situations, not in a mechanical way. You compare the social situations one is put, and then compare who is equal and who is unequal, and then raise the question why. And point then which comes out, I think, that the concept of economic equality is a derivative value. It is derived from the original value of democracy, which believes in the liberation of human capability. Contrast to feudalism, contrast to capitalism, etc., etc., etc. Democracy is the final value for which Democrats fight. Well, we claim economic equality is a derivative value from this. So a derivative value cannot destroy the original value. So that is another way of looking at the economic equality. And Ernest Barker is quite emphatic on this point. Therefore, two major conceptions emerge when we take this point. One, equality of wealth and equality of income. So wealth is one thing, that is substantively is an amount, and equality of income is the flow idea, that how much income equally should be given to all, etc. So this is the debatable point. The real debate is on equality of income, because as Lionel Robbins, the great economist, once pointed out, that inherited wealth and fiscal rectification of inherited wealth, I quote, he said, it is a revolution under anasthea. It is not revolution. Revolution under anasthea. This is the expression of Robbins, Lord Robbins. And so he said that one thing should be very clear, that private property cannot be altogether abolished. Impossible. From the point of view of justice, no government can abolish private property as such.
It would also hinder individual growth if we abolish private property.
Yes, there are so many arguments, and that is one of the arguments also. And then if we conclude with Marx, he rejected the entire idea of the bourgeoisie of economic equality in these terms. He said, after all, the evil lies in the production system and the distribution mechanism. So unless growth, resources of the society is equally distributed, there is no question of economic equality and his rhetorics about it. So he preferred the principle, we will explain it later, that from each according to his ability to each according to his need. When needs differ, naturally, absolute equality is not the desired ideal. And Marx said that inequality can be abolished only when state or capitalism itself is abolished. That is final phase of communism, etc. So I think with this we have got a general survey of different notions of equality. And that I think will be, at least for the time being, that awarding equal rewards to everyone is ethically bad. We can today stop with this idea that this is the lesson which emerges from history, experience, philosophical inquiries. Isn't it?
Absolutely, sir.